In this discussion, the speakers will discuss the correlating point between the ending of third-party cookies and the beginning of first-party data fraud. Welcoming our panelists up on the stage.
The topic suggests fraud in first-party data world. So for a lot of people who you think that, with Google phasing out third-party data, we will have more control on our data. Probably not, because every brand or every company by this time has our data. So how do you tackle that situation? While the DPDP Act allows you to have some kind of control, but how do you know where your data is at what time, and how do you curb that pilferage of data in a first-party data world? Sahil?
Okay, great. So very interesting and intense topic. And as we say, the time of the cookie is over. This is how the cookie crumbles. But we'll whip up some new recipes with first-party data. Now, to be honest, it's very contentional. I feel it's a myth that first-party data is truly first-party. Because in all honesty, the same user is going to multiple platforms. So if at all there is a fraud or a breach, how do you know which platform was responsible? Ultimately, the user's GID, device ID, cookie that is impacted, which holds some amount of personal data. And if at all the user is lucky, the GID is compromised, maybe some sensitive information might not be compromised. So Google Chrome keeps telling you so many websites, your password is not secure. I feel it's a lot of proactive measures that need to be now accounted for. We have to hold the entire ecosystem responsible for vigilance and proactive decision making. But as a platform, we are responsible for the data. We have two responsibilities. One is how do we leverage this data to increase more enterprise efficiency, but at the same time, the responsibility of making sure data is secure for the user. So certain ways of fraud, and I think it's important to define how fraud is done in the digital realm. You've got phishing, you've got spoofing, you've got data breaches. All of these things are happening. And the users in more situations than not are not aware that their data is compromised. So it is very important that strong encryption is the need of the hour. I don't think the government has a problem with data collection. It is about how you are managing that data. Right? So data encryption, strong algorithms which ensure that while that transmission and storage is happening, no bad actors are able to enter. The other thing that we typically do in our line of business is anonymization and aggregation for advertising and marketing. So when you look at data, it's in clusters. You have to balance out personalization as well as security. And other than that, I think user consent and permissions is the third pillar which really needs to be embraced by brands. It's not that users have a problem with you leveraging the data. The problem is you hide it behind a privacy policy. You don't really tell them how you're going to leverage this data. So that user opt-in has to be made available so that if the user does not want his data to be shared, there is an option. For our application, we are okay if the user uninstalls the application because there are certain permissions that they do not want to give. But the point is you have to tell them what is the permission and why are you seeking it. So that transparency really comes in. And other than that, very strong ISMS, ISO, GDPR is obviously something that went in phases. Initially I still remember at that time, a lot of companies would say we would do this for European users. We not do it for the entire user base. So compliance is, I think, the need of the hour. And eventually, I think it is the responsibility of us being a partner within the ecosystem that we enable this very safe behavior for users. It's happening globally, but I think in India with DPDP coming in, that level of maturity will come in, in phases.
I'll take it from his question. The first point he said is about data collection and then data storage. But there are companies which have already been sitting on tons of data already over the years. So they are not started collecting today. They started collecting about 10 years back. How do you clean up that data? How do you ensure that data is not misused? To both of you, sir.
So we looked at the technical aspects by our peer colleague. Essentially, when you're already looking at a trove of data, especially in a country like India, where privacy was not the first question when either the data being was collected or when it was managed or hosted or used, is the primary challenge. I think with the new act, at least we are now conscious of how we want to deal with data going forward. But as you rightly pointed out, there is one data that we are now conscious of, and let's say we'll put a policy or a framework what do you do with the data which is already there? And I believe that's a challenge that a lot of organizations today are dealing with, especially places where you need to retain data from a regulatory standpoint. One simple practice is inform, purge where possible. So there is less first-party ownership. Because if you really look at data, I mean, I'm not going to focus so much about the technology problem. I believe that is always pertinent to a case and needs to be looked at differently. But if you really try and understand today, data essentially means that somebody is putting a trust in you, in your brand or in your product. And trust is the new currency, especially in the hybrid world. We interact with so many online businesses. We interact with so many applications. We don't know who's behind it. We don't know the person, but we trust that brand. Think of a Facebook. I really remember embracing it all the way back in 2005, 6. But I went away from it long back, right? When we started hearing all the breaches, when we started hearing of ways in which data is being misused. So essentially, there is nothing that comes and tells us what to do with the data. But I think if a firm thinks of ESG measures and wants to be sustainable and wants to maintain the trust, then they must go and make sure that they solve the historical data causes.
Thanks for the opportunity. I'm being a manufacturing kind of mind frame. I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about what I know. I'm going to talk about what we behave or we practice. Number one, as far as manufacturing is concerned, if you talk about data, we talk about machine. We talk about collecting data from machines. It may be a bus, it may be a battery, it may be a machine. That is the first thing which comes into our mind. We are not bothered about personal data. That is the biggest problem in manufacturing. Yes, a DPDPA is going to come, so we have to start thinking differently. We are doing that, but still, being an auto manufacturer, we have so much of data, which is rather more crucial than personal data. To quote an example, we have a machine which has got some problems, which has generated some error codes, which we are not in a position to resolve. We share the data to the OEM. Are we supposed to do that? But we have to do that because that whether it is going to the right person, but subsequently what is happening to that data is not visible for us, although they are the owner for the data who can analyze, understand, and then subsequently. That is one kind of. The other kind of data is the data which is available with us, which we are supposed to keep it for 30 years for tracing purposes. For example, when we are manufacturing cylinder-related manufacturing, we are supposed to keep these many of the properties. If any mishappening happens, it has to get referred. Although it is not first worker data, that data is rather more crucial for some other compliance purposes. So protecting all those things are a major problem. Specifically for us, it is more challenge because our mindset has to change rather much quicker than what we were expecting earlier. That's where we stand today.
To you have a very young audience. You have online gamers. Yeah, where does that work now? Or you have mostly you have their PIIs. So how do you protect that data?
Okay, so I think first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here. And for a entertainment business company, right, I think it's always focused more around user engagement and experience. And all the entertainment companies really rely on the first party data that they get in order to optimize on the user experience, double down on the engagement, etc. So in order to, of course, and given that the monetary aspect is also being involved, financial security of the data, for example, users' payment details, etc., is also very, very paramount. So in our case, at WinZo, we generally, at least from the platform fair play perspective, etc., we sort of first is obviously the architecture has to be decentralized, right? As was earlier mentioned. So the data is not concentrated at one point, and it's distributed within systems. Apart from that, we also focus a lot on internal models that we have built, right? that obviously is working throughout the time to just identify what kind of behavior is normal among the users, etc., and any possible interventions that are required at any point of time are taken. From the authentication purposes, etc., we have to make sure that you are using right form of encryptions, IP whitelisting, so that you do not attract sort of unwanted attacks from the external ecosystem. And obviously, at any point of time, the production data has to be sort of trimmed down so that the exposure is minimized. So in that case, we generally maintain only a handful of data on the production side, while most of the other data, which is not really required for the day-to-day operations, is generally sort of put in as a backup at a different place. So that also reduces the exposure of user data that we have. Apart from that, I think the required compliance guidelines already exist, right? For example, for the payments and card details, you have PCI DSS compliance that is mandatory. For other details with regards to users' bank account, etc., there is also a requirement of tokenization that has to be ensured, right? We take help of all the third-party service providers who are already experts and have built solutions around that. So yeah, this is how I think in our day-to-day lives we work on providing the best experience without compromising on the data security.
Understood. The other part is, so far since morning we've heard about AI, we've heard about blockchain technology, we have different pieces of technology. We've also been concerned about other stuff like deepfakes and all. But these technology can also be used to protect your first party data, right? This technology can also be harnessed in the right manner, as opposed to just thinking that there will be only an adverse impact of these. So can you give us examples of how that can be utilized? We can start from anyone. Yeah.
I can probably take that. So as you rightly pointed out, today AI is being used by adversaries more than it has been used by defenders. And a prime example of that is that it can accelerate outcomes for any adversary. We all hear of these ransomware operations, for example, right? So essentially, gone are the days where somebody is actually crafting that phishing email, right? Somebody is actually trying to do that stuff. Now the AI can do that for you. The generative AI has really become a boon. Now the guy does not need to, we used to go and teach in our organizations that look out for spelling mistakes when you are looking for a phishing email. But the AI knows better, right? So their craft has become a lot better as far as the adversaries are concerned. And then on the other hand, in the industry, a big challenge is this scare around what would this technology do, how would it change us, and what are the risks that it brings to us. The good thing is, this technology is really getting driven top down. So it's no more a CIO or a technology head going to their leader and saying, can we use this? It is the other way around. Now, CIOs and leaders are being asked that we want to use generative AI, we want to make use of these things. How do we do that, right? So that's the blessing, but it's still a double-edged sword. But coming on, that's the problem side of the picture. Now, flipping the question to what you asked about the fact that how do we use it in positive fashion, right? Just a few minutes back, I talked about the fact which you pointed out about historical data. The data could be structured, data could be unstructured. Imagine a human going and think of your organization maybe 5-7 years back. We all have heard of classification policies, right? So we would always deploy a classification policy to the user. Tell them, please rate your document as critical, confidential, internal, or whatever words you were using, but essentially a classification was given. Now imagine the machine doing it for you. So when we are trying to understand what we are trying to protect in today's cloud world, where technology or a server or a production instance can be spun up in a matter of seconds and sometimes automatically, do we really have the right technology to discover that, to actually understand what is being done in the environment as easy and in the speed the adversary is doing it? So I personally feel there's a lot of blessing that these technology bring in, especially with structured data. So I feel like some of these technologies still are dealing with a little bit of unstructured data. But as far as you have any structured data, whether it's an open source database, etc., we have run some use cases in AI and it's been very fruitful. On a personal note, we have found thousands of SharePoint shares, file servers, where even we did not know what kind of data existed. So it's a boon, and I think we all got to exploit it to our advantage.
Let me convert this into a manufacturing. For example, the data is more critical as far as safety is concerned, because in manufacturing, when we are specifically in auto, we focus on safety of the passenger. That's very crucial. So, using the latest technologies, we identify, and when the bus is on the run, if the temperature of the battery goes beyond a level, it can burst out. So, we stop charging that and then we take the corrective action. Doing this manually, taking instant action is not possible. This is where we use the technology which is identifying, it is collating the data, identifying at the right time it triggers, and then that directly sends the information to the bus, and then the charging stops. So this is one of the very good use case where technology has helped us increasing safety of the passenger because of the vulnerabilities which are there due to technology.
Sahil?
Yeah, so I can share perspective on both AI and blockchain. I think while we are sort of worried about the abuse of the technology, I think use and abuse both go hand in hand. If you look at the historical data problem statement, I think that's where AI can work with large amounts of data, the large data models that they have. And if set in the right way, it can help with both structured and unstructured data problems. On the other hand, blockchain makes it extremely difficult to fudge data. You got a very distributed ledger system. At the end of the day, there are so many checks and balances which are baked into the technology itself that being on a blockchain will anyways assure the user that my data is, if not 100% safe, extremely difficult to breach. And some of the steps that brands should also take is, look at more consent management platforms, deploy more consent management platforms to collect this data. Because ultimately that instills trust and there is no bias when it comes to handling of that data. Leverage a lot of CDPs, customer data platforms, and data clean rooms to analyze this data. Because eventually the environment in which your data is existing, being transmitted and stored, that will dictate longevity with respect to users' privacy. So I wouldn't really say that we should fear artificial intelligence, because before AI, there is I. And using that intelligence is far more important today than really being worried about whether AI is going to operate the world as we go. Human intelligence has built AI. There will be a time when it will be autonomous. But I highly doubt that there would be a stage where we are not in the driver's seat.
So yeah, I'd like to quickly add on to the point that in terms of application of AGIs to our day-to-day operations, I think it would be something like a simple example of, say, CRM that you have, right? You receive tons of user queries on distributed platforms, so social media to mails, chats, etc., right? And I think one way to centralize the user sentiment, obviously, would be to just send all of this data to AGM to get that sentiment analysis, right? You can also maybe run quality assurance audits on that, right? Whether the users are getting correct kind information or resolutions from the team or agents, etc., or not. So I think we have to find different use cases, but I think it is very interesting that the ways in which AGI would eventually be a part of every organization's some use case or the other.
In first-party data, one of the biggest thing is data breaches, because you're sitting on data, and we have had some of the big brands like a big basket, or even the Aadhaar data breach which happened is supposed to be one of the biggest breaches. How do you manage that side of the game? Like, how do you ensure your data is not breached? How do you ensure their systems are working in a way that you see less pilferage? I think one thing that Sir pointed out was handing over your data to OEMs or to third parties. The moment you do that, there is a high possibility of data pilferage happening. So how do you curb that? How do you reduce your dependency?
The first point would be obviously the decentralization of data that we talked about. And so you are compromising a single point of exposure. And apart from that, I think the second most important point is, you always run assessments on your systems, right? So there are third parties who are doing regular audits of your systems to identify any exposure that you may have, which can be plugged in. Authentication. So in order to obviously avoid any external access, unauthorized access to the system, it is really important to have robust authentication systems on your databases and systems. That includes, having, multiple tokens that can be implemented to avoid that kind of a breaches, ensuring that the configurability is always on the server side, right? So you remove any exposures on the client side or device side, which generally happens to be the case where, a lot of authentication tokens, etc., are clubbed into the client side of the app. So I think these are the few measures. And I think one important thing would obviously be the storing the data, that is the critical data, for only the maximum of what it is required to be used in your operations at a single point. Other than that, I think it has to be moved to a different system where you can run all sorts of analytics and intelligence that you want to build on, but removing it from the production setup would obviously help reduce the exposure. One more thing that I would like to bring is what we do at WinZo is we collaborate with different institutions, right? So we run regular, for example, hackathons, right? Apart from that, we are also running partnerships and sponsored research with leading technological institutions in India and abroad. So what they do is basically they not only help assess and mitigate the risk that you have on the platform, but also help build better practices which are more robust, more foolproof, etc., that can be implemented and make it reduce the exposure as well.
Yeah, just to add to what he said, and while on the technology side there are checks and balances and there are policy and measures and compliance, I also believe it is a lot to do with sensitizing the people across the system. Because I often see that data sharing happens in a very risky environment with some external links. We have agencies who are giving us data. We are exchanging that data. The CEO needs some data, and that CSV file is given over a WhatsApp. I'm just saying these kind of things are happening, and this is what I call in my books low-hanging security measures. So it is utmost important that the cyber security team in any organization is empowered to not just educate, but also to test at all levels. So for instance, in our organization at Bobble, we continuously do this exercise with the cyber security team where they would send some phishing messages to everybody in the team. And more often than not, we would find some people do end up clicking and some people do end up interacting with those pieces. So I guess education is the need of the hour, and vigilance and proactivity is what is required. Whether it's at an enterprise level or at an individual level. You know how easy it is to detect passwords. I mean, still people are using birthdays and stuff like that as passwords, and they do not want to go for two-factor authentication. It's a very simple thing. I was speaking to someone and they said, because I'm not carrying that device with me every time, so that one login is more important. I said, what if somebody else logs into your account? So I'm saying these kind of proactive, vigilant things is what will actually avoid half of the fraud. The rest of it, technology will take care of it as we go along, but compliance is very important.
And how do you talk to users in smaller cities? Because we are aware, are they?
So I'll come out to the users point later, but to continue the theme that we were talking about. See, I think one, we've talked about the technology measures. I would probably say at least since the transformation post-COVID, right? I mean, there's a lot of hybrid workforce. The way technology had always worked, we had always talked about defense in depth, but that perimeter is gone now, right? So I guess there's a need of the hour to also go back and sternly look if we have retrofitted our cyber security controls, first of all, because the way things were operating are not how they are operating today. Possibly they were inside an environment where they were downloading data to a certain desktop, but now everybody is operating on a laptop. They have access to everything, and what if that is inside somebody's house? What if that is not protected, right? So you have to look at, first of all, the cyber protection problem in a different lens, is one thing that I would like to say. And when the theme of the conversation we started was, how do you kind of make sure that data is protected? See, it's very important that we as protectors and defenders of those systems don't end up believing or owning the data. It's very important for the business or the people to understand that it's their data. They have to protect it first. Hence, if we switch the paradigm with tools, technologies, or behaviors which can actually be inflicted back to the users. For example, if somebody is about to send out a misdirected email, this is a typical case of GDPR. See, by the way, the company I work for operates in about 80 countries, 12 highly regulated every part of the world you can think of we operate in. So essentially now imagine having data from these 80 countries and somebody is about to send data from customer A to customer B. What if there is a system which actually prompts the user? So instead of a DLP which kicks in later and you forensically go back and say, hey, you know what, I think we breached something. What if it can tell the user you're about to type a Gmail address instead of a corporate address? Things like that, right? So how do you empower the user end of the day to make it more error prone, right? So essentially shift left. That's the mandate. That's the theme. The more you empower the user, I think the better data protection would.
So in manufacturing, you have to have a different kind of mindset. Number one is what is the data for us? Number one is R&D data. It is very crucial. It is very bigger in size. This all the things, 95% of our things happens because of employee. The data theft happens because of employee, because we are 95% outside in data is always there. Inside out is very less. We are protected. No user is allowed to browse outside our internal MPLS thing. Many restrictions are there. But despite giving the right knowledge to the employee, the IP of the employee should get protected after getting all these details. You have some solution which is prompting somebody's kindly do not do. But if they are carrying it on physical paper or carrying it on some other way of taking photographs, we are not in a position to make things happen. The only thing which we are doing is regularly, as he informed earlier, that we constantly send once in a quarter, we measure who are vulnerable internally. That is very crucial because 95% of our workforce are doing something with the data, and because of IoT and all, the volume has got increased rather, because we are trying to use endpoints than of going for cloud for certain reasons, and which is creating more problems, and we do not have a foolproof system today. Because to be very honest, in the last 4 years only we started thinking security as a very important factor when we started protecting our data. So this is where we stand, and the complication is increasing more because of some data which is going to cloud to consume some AI-related facilities available in the market. We are trying to bring in more 4 different layers of audit which is happening in a way if you look at it. Number one, a third party is coming and doing audit, that's okay. And internal team who has technical knowledge of security, they are doing the audit, that's number 2. Number 3, the unique, many of the people will know, our finance internal audit also does the audit. What we do is we provide the input what we have collected from these 2 third party and internal audit team, and then because they have zero knowledge on security, we tell them, you go and try to search something of this kind. We were getting some success in identifying some of the audit which was supposed to come out from internal and third party, which has come out from the finance internal audit team has done a good job. The fourth one is we are trying to bring in some software. To start with, we are doing for all transaction systems where internal audit tool which has been put, which is going to help us in giving some internal data which is not in line with the SOP which we have created. So this is how we are trying to protect. Yes, we have started, we will be learning fast.
Thank you so much. I think it says time's up, so we'll move for the next session, but thank you so much for the discussion. Thank you.